Hi. So today I thought I'd talk with you about another aspect of synergetics, another, if you like, generalized principle of synergetics, which is incredibly fundamental to existence and something that we are blissfully, we're not completely unaware of it, but we're not really familiar with it either. Excuse me. So, what is precession? Precession is the relationship between two moving bodies, in principle. Right? So, for instance, if I have an object, a body on the end of a string, and I swirl that around me, the object does want to get away in a curved line around the next bigger sphere, which is the Earth. Supposedly a straight line, but really it wants to go off in another curve of precession. But if I constrain the body with a string, what happens is that it can't go in that straight line, which would be there, or that bigger circle, but it has to go around that point of restrainment, that other body that holds it, right? So if I do this with this object, with this body, and even I allow it to also precess around that axis at the time, it even turns out to be a musical instrument. So whoop, that is one instrument here, and it just hit the other. Another example of how precession affects how we can interact with the world. Because the angle in which I interact with this body to create sound is exactly that of precession, which turns out, a right angle. And this is why we have right angles in the universe. It's everywhere, right? But it's not that what we perceive it to be. Because when we think of a right angle, we think of it in a term of a static framework, right? So we have the idea of a square or a square or a cube as something that is able to hold that form, because we don't see that there is something holding it. But I'm not going to go into all these things again for the 100th time, because I have made a bunch of videos on what a square is and what a triangle is and how they are not the same. And I also did some on why it's nonsense to think of the world in which we live, which is an embodiment of space-time, to think of that in terms of a separate space and a static space and a linear time. And I went into detail on where you find time within time-space, where are the realms, the spheres of time. All of that I talked about abundantly, and what I'm trying to do now is to go off from there, right? So if you find any of those things interesting and you haven't looked at it yet, please go back to it and check out the other videos I did on these things. Today I'm talking about precession, and we already had the example of the orbit, right, of the thing that is moving around that constraint. What really is happening is there's two moving like this, and if one has more mass, it's going to be relatively more or less inclined to move about by the smaller mass. That's why the sun doesn't really, I mean, it is affected by the Earth, but it's not like Jupiter, where you have a center of gravity of the system between Sun and Jupiter, where the center is actually between the two. It's not within the Sun, because Jupiter is so massive. So this is all precession, but also if you have a bee going into a flower, you know, it's going this way in, but it's going that way and pollinating the flower. We consider that a side effect, but it's an effect of precession. And the same is true for if you take a string. First thing is you can't push it straight, you can only pull it straight, right? But if I were to pull on this strong enough so that it would be visible, you could see that pulling on it this way makes it compress this way, right? So it pulls together this way, offset by 90 degrees in terms to the no, this way together if it's pulled out there, and vice versa. If you push in, it goes out here. So there is precession again. And even, you know, I talked in Synergetics in a nutshell about what these geometries really are and how they are spheres interacting. And within that, you know, the first body of space-time is the Tetra, the 4 eyes. Okay, so this is 4 triangles, 6 struts, and the thing is, if you look at it from this perspective, where you're focused on a triangle, on what I call the left angle, which is the structural part of it, then you see it's all triangles, right? But if I turn it this way, and you look at it on one of the edges, it looks almost like a square, doesn't it? So these two struts here, these two vectors, the front and the back from your perspective, they are offset by 90 degrees, and all of them are. So it's like you pull open space-time this way. And if you see a cross somewhere, it's important to remember that those two things that cross there cannot go through the same point. They can't, because the point itself is the interaction. It's something that is a body as well, you know. And this cross is always with a... It gets close to, but never through the same. It can't. And if I look at the 4 spheres that give you the 4 eyes, this one, they can come together as 2 pairs, and every pair is 1 unit, if you like. And when they do, if I take these chestnuts, we can see that. If I put them together this way, it wouldn't work. They would still have room to move. So the square is inherently, if it's non-triangulated, it's inherently dynamic. It's a transform. It's not a form, right? But look, if we move them together like so, we get 2 triangles, 2 left angles, a pair of eyes, if you like. And then we can move them like this. And this is where they all meet. And and look at that from another way. If these two come together not like this, where they are orthogonal, parallel to one another, but they are offset by precession, they come together like so, and immediately form the tetra. Right? So even within the first and very most basic of all synergetic space-time structures, it's already evident that there is that rectangular interaction there, right? So we have this, and if we increase the frequency of that, like so, next frequency, again, we can look at it from a triangular perspective, left angular perspective, and it's all triangles. And this is the exact pattern that is also what we call the flower of life, right? So well, this is not the flower of life, because that is you know the pattern. I mean the pattern of the interacting circles, which is a plane of space-time, and these, looked at from that perspective, are all equilateral left-angle triangles, right? But if you turn it over this way, it looks all squares, all of it. And even in much more complex structures, like for instance the second frequency of the 8i, which is inside here, you see, look at it left angle and it looks all left angles, and turn it over so that you look at the tip here and it looks like all squares. But all of those squares are triangles. They are made up by triangles coming together and interacting. Right, so at the heart of this, the 8i here, you can try to perceive it or look at it from this way and see its three interlocked squares, right? But they are only there and stable because it's all triangulated. If I had only half of it, which is like what you see here, right? You can see how this fits in here, like so. Let me take the other one, this one, like this, right? So if I take that out and we look at only half of this structure, you see how that is still that square, right? But it is not static, it's not stable, it's dynamic, it's the interaction of these four eyes here, right? So to think of the world within that square, without any triangles, you know, whether they are like these, where I have a triangulated cube, which is really a 4i holding a cube. Within that, there's triangulation happening in the corners where the strings interact, so the whole thing doesn't fall apart. But without the diagonals, it can't hold that shape because it's all squares. It's all like this. It's all dynamic. And to consider the world within that thing where you have that and that is something, you know, it's absolutely ignorant of the fact that to have that you need triangles to hold it. There is no way around it. And even the very famous, by now I hope, famous vector equilibrium, right? The mother of all spheres, a dozen spheres around one. Even that, from this perspective, looks like flower of life, right? Like left angles all the way, and from this perspective, it's squares all the way. And we can recognize this. And this is very flexible, very dynamic, whereas this is only a little, because there's the core and the omni-triangulation around the whole thing. So this can still wheel and dance a little, but not as much as it could with this setup, where it can grow and shrink or breathe out and breathe in. But all the interactions that happen there are because there are, or the movement that you can see happening in these things comes because there is that square which is enabling the body to move, right? So if you have a tree, it's all Tetra. It's grown into the ground like the roots, and it's grown into the air ocean with the roots that are the branches. And both of them are still, you know, they are growing as tetras and turning as the earth turns, so they grow as a round thing, but they are rooted and triangulated all the way with the earth, and they do move. They are not static, you know, they are dynamic, living, breathing, growing from the inside out, but they are not able to walk about, you know, like we are, because we got four legs, 4 arms, 4 hands, so we are able-bodied in that sense to enabled to walk. Yeah, so all these beautiful squares that you see in the world are there because you have the triangles holding them. And if they aren't there, then there is no square. And if we recognize that, we can interact with the world much more within kin, with kinship. It's a reciprocal relationship, and you can see how every time you give your hand to somebody, what happens is that you have that interaction of the precession here, precession at play, and dancing is a beautiful way to play with that as you turn around with somebody around your common center, right? So we can take all of that and understand that in some sense, in a very generalized principle sense, it's all the same thing, it's all the same going on, it's precession. And that leads us to recognize stuff like, for instance, if you have water does spheres all the time, right? So if it's small enough, it's a drop, and if it's too big, it falls down and then goes looking for the next bigger sphere, right? Be that the surface of a puddle of or the river to the ocean. And if it's very tiny, that drop, we talk about its surface tension. And that is essentially the membrane of that drop that develops by itself, And where did I drop that thing? One is missing. Here. This one. Right, so this would be our drop. And if it's like a soap bubble, then it's really just the surface that is in tension. All the molecules holding together like around, not inside or not towards the in or the out, but around. They are holding together like this. And if it's really a drop of water, then there is an inside too, and it's in constant relationship to the outside. And what you see is that this surface tension, this holding together around, embracing, that is essentially gravity, right? So we are all pulling or drawing on one another around the earth, and the sum total of that drawing around is precessionally working to the inside. It's offset like that. It's like the electricity running through a wire this way, and the magnetic field lines developing that way around, again offset by precession. And at one perspective, the one of gravity that goes around, we have what develops into matter, something that matters, is a wave that is omnitriangulated, and it's something that, depending on the frequency and the mass, that really is nothing static either. It's really the movement of the system, right? So if you have take a propeller, which is again sort of the thing as this. If this goes very, very slow, I was able to, excuse the motors. This used to be a very quiet place, but sometimes it's just noisy. Right, so imagine this is slow enough I could point my finger through. Go beep, beep, beep without problem. So there wouldn't be an interference between this going around and my finger going there. I could time that, no problem. But if the frequency of the turning increases so that it is higher than my capability of going this way, then it would become something like a solid surface, right? It's just faster than me. It's spinning so quickly that I can't put my finger through. And Bucky said that it's probably the case that everything in the universe is moving at the speed of light. Oh no. So my battery is about to die, but don't worry, maybe we can do this still. So everything is moving at the speed of light. But if it's moving as a radius out from the center of a star or from the surface of a body towards you, then you perceive it as light. And it's moving in vacuum at the speed of light and wherever else at the speed of light in that medium. But at the same time, when you have, for instance, the molecules that make up this thing, or take something very heavy like gold, the molecules in there are moving, the energy that is bound up in the synergy of the particles, they are moving so quickly in such a high frequency that the speed itself is still the speed of light. It's just in a very small volume of space-time, and thus it's much faster, and you can't go through, compared to something that is moving at the same speed but in a bigger orbit. Right, so that is all to say that precession is a very fundamental aspect of us existing, of universe existing, and you will find it wherever you look, you know, whenever you have something working together on and influencing one another. There's always these offset effects, you know, the precession, and they are synergetic, you know, they are not it might be a bit weird to get your mind around it at first, but it's all possible, you know. You can start to think about these things and play with them and try to see where you find these things manifest, right? Like yeah, even the fact that we are walking perpendicular on the earth, we are essentially walking around the earth like this, yeah, and we are offset by 90 degrees to the surface of it at any given point, because we are moving bodies and the earth is too. So there is precession. Okay, so I talked enough, and this video is long enough, and I'm happy to have you here and hope to get some feedback and resonance from you. Hope to see you soon, and let's keep in touch and link up, and yeah, reconsider, relearn, and maybe remember as well how we are all just one, you know, insides and outsides of the same. Have a good day. Day, maybe that's something between time and day, I don't know. Have a good time. Take care.